Welcome to the Quiverful Adoptions podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Casey. We are two adoptive mamas who have walked in your shoes, so we get it.
We remember the crazy journey of adoption like it was yesterday, and we are so thankful we get to share some amazing stories with you right here from the living room of our office.
Well, actually, we're sitting in the bathroom, but the living room does sound better.
Anyway, none of that matters. We're glad you're here.
So grab a cup of coffee and join us as we dive right in. Super excited to be here today.
I know. We are very excited, even though it's a dreary, rainy day outside.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about ICPC. I know that is one thing that a lot of families have a lot of questions about. Elizabeth, didn't you wait out ICPC?
I did. When we adopted Ellie, our daughter, we had a almost 2-week stay in North Carolina. And actually, it was much longer because the government shut down the government offices shut down due to a flood in South Carolina. So we had gotten approval from North Carolina, but South Carolina would not approve us to come home. So it was frustrating, but it allowed us some bonding time.
That's awesome. Yeah, we didn't have to suffer through ICPC, but I'm sure it created for some good memories.
Yeah.
So who do we have today?
Today, we have Allison, or as we call her, Allie Bullard McNair of Building Families, LLC. And Allie is a dedicated adoption and assisted reproductive technology, or ART, attorney. While Building Families is located in downtown Columbia, South Carolina, the practice serves the entire state of South Carolina. Allie seeks to meet the needs of the firm's clients throughout their adoption and surrogacy journeys, walking them through each phase of the process step by step. Allie stays informed on advances in family building options, including advances in medical technology, protocols on ethical adoptions, and surrogacy arrangements, as well as the changing laws in the area of adoption and surrogacy. Allie is a member of the American Academy of Adoption and Assisted Reproductive Technology Attorneys. Membership in that society is reserved for those who undergo an extensive application process, ensuring that their experience is sufficient to make them leaders in the field of adoption. Allie is also a member of the American Bar Association Assisted Reproductive Law Subcommittee, the South Carolina State Bar, and the Richland County Bar Association.
Lord, some people are overachievers.
I'll say, you guys are going to love her though. She's incredible. And another thing we're going to talk about, I think all of you are going to be interested to hear, is the special circumstances regarding South Carolina law, South Carolina adoptions. And I know there's a lot of questions surrounding that, but Allie is going to answer everything.
Let's dive in.
Yeah.
We're with Allie McNair from Building Families out of Columbia, South Carolina.
Yes, we're so excited to have her with us today, and y'all are going to love her.
Thank you, Allie, for being with us.
I'm so glad to be with y'all today.
So why don't we get started, Allie, and you just kind of do a little intro and share a little bit about your story and how you got into adoption.
Sure. So I'm Allie McNair, and adoption has just kind of always been a part of my life, I feel like. When I was a child, I was exposed to children in the foster care system and children who had been adopted, and their stories just kind of left an imprint on me from a young age. I remember asking my parents lots of questions about adoption as I was a young child, and I think just growing up, it was just something that captivated my heart and my mind, and my mom always says that it's funny what sticks with you as from childhood to adulthood, and she can remember me talking about adoption as a young child, and so she is like, oh my gosh, now that's what you do for a living.
When I was a child, I wanted to be a Walmart greeter.
So yours took a turn.
I just wanted to be able to hand out the stickers, that's all.
And now you hate hugging people.
I do. I don't like talking to people.
But Allie, you're not adopted, so you haven't been personally impacted by adoption. So what do you think made that impression on you?
So I've questioned that a lot because I don't have just one particular lightning bolt story that happened to me. It was just kind of something that always fascinated me and intrigued me. And as I got older, I went to divinity school after undergraduate. I was a religion major in college and then went to divinity school. And I just always knew that I wanted my career to be tied to something that I cared deeply about and would have a larger impact in the world and on myself. And so adoption was just always in my mind, and I can't really explain why, except that I always just felt pulled in that direction. So after divinity school, I worked in a church for a couple of years, but law school had always been in the back of my mind. And I went to law school, got really involved in family law courses. Adoption again kept popping up in law school as I was taking family law courses. And I met some adoption practitioners in South Carolina while I was in law school, and I just knew it was kind of the culmination of this pull that I'd had throughout my life, even though, like you said, I didn't have kind of an aha moment or experience with it. I was just always drawn to it. And then in law school, I also learned about surrogacy, because that was kind of a natural flow over for people who are experiencing infertility. And so a lot of people who work in the adoption field also work in the surrogacy field. So when I finished law school, I went and worked for a family law firm, and my boss there, to me at first, seemed really nice, and he told me that I could just go meet whoever I wanted to meet and do all the research that I wanted to on adoption. And so I spent the first 9 months of my legal career doing that. And then my boss went to jail.
Oh, wow.
So you never really know, how things are going to go. And it was a surprise to all of us. It was a larger firm. There were about 15 of us that worked there. And it was just kind of a surprise one day that he was not there. And I didn't want to apply for a job after that. I was like, I've done the research. I've met the people. I want to be in adoption law. Yeah. And so I went into partnership with 2 other people who had been in that firm. And I worked with them for a number of years while I was trying to build up a roster of adoption and surrogacy cases. And then last year, I started Building Families. We're a little over a year old, and we do only adoption and surrogacy law. And I work there with my husband, Cole, and a paralegal, Emily Henson. And it's just really like a family and home. And we've just loved expanding our adoption practice and surrogacy practice. So that's kind of the story that led me here.
Awesome. And on Instagram, it's at Building Families SC.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep. So last year, you and Cole got married. Is that right?
Yeah, November 2017.
So how is it being a newlywed and working with your husband? Is what we all want.
So most days it's wonderful. It's certainly been a learning experience. Yeah, we got married in November and started packing up boxes at my old law firm and opened Building Families in January. So he's handling a lot of the surrogacy side of things and
the embryo, right? He's doing
a lot of the embryo adoption. And we have just, it's been a learning experience, but we have different personalities that I feel like really feed to help us grow because we have different strengths. So it's been good.
That's so fun. So we wanted to bring you in today to really talk about ICPC, especially within South Carolina. So you don't have to touch on the other states. We can just talk about ICPC in general and then the ICPC in regards to South Carolina. So what is ICPC?
So ICPC is the Interstate Compact on the Placement of Children. And it's a law that all 50 states and DC have adopted. And it handles basically the flow of children in between states. So anytime there's a child is being placed in another state for the purpose of adoption, you have to comply with ICPC. Close relatives are exempt from it, but in a non-familial adoption, crossing state lines, you're going to have to comply with ICPC.
So for the families that don't know really anything about ICPC, what does ICPC really mean for the family?
So the main thing that it means for the family, or what they're going to care about the most, is the fact that they have to, according to the law, they have to stay in the state where the child was born until they get approval from both the state where the child was born and the state where they live that they're taking the child to. And that process, it involves just a lot of paperwork, a lot of paper pushing. We have to get we have to get a court order. We have to get the biological mother to fill out some extra forms. The adoptive parents have to fill out some extra forms, legal risk forms, accounting forms. And we have to submit a packet. It's usually 50 to 75 page packet to here, the South Carolina ICPC office if the child was born here, and then the South Carolina office would send it to wherever the adoptive family lives. And so both states have to give approval. And so the families usually end up spending, we say on average 2 weeks, but per plan on 3 weeks for your worst case scenarios in the state where the child was born.
Now, is that something that's different for every state? Like some states may take longer than other states?
Yes. So it's very dependent on where the child was born and where the child is going. So even down to the fact that in South Carolina, we can submit the packets by email, but some states require a hard copy. So that means you're having South Carolina overnight it. They have to receive it in their mail and get a hard copy of it, which, while it's overnight, sometimes that's a 2-day process. So each state has about 72 hours to review the packet when they have it in hand. So it really just depends on weekends, holidays, when the packet is getting to them. And in South Carolina, we have an extra step of having to get a court order before we even file the ICPC packet.
What is the court order?
So South Carolina only allows children to be placed out of state for very specific reasons. So the child either has to be designated as a special needs child, which means that they are members of a sibling group, they're of mixed racial heritage, they're 6 years old or older, or they have a physical, mental, or emotional disability. So that's what would be a special needs child that would allow us to place a child out of state. We can place out of state for relative placement. If one parent is in the military here in South Carolina, we can place out of state. Then we kind of have this catch-all of unusual or exceptional circumstances, and if there are deemed to be unusual or exceptional circumstances, we can place a child with a non-resident out of state. And that comes into play a lot with what's actually going on with the biological mother. What are her reasons for choosing this family? How did she get connected with this family? And that's one of the extra documents that we have to go over with the biological mother when it's now to state placement. Our law did change in just April of this year, and now we can place out of state if all persons required to give a consent to adoption have signed a consent to adoption.
Okay.
So that kind of makes the process a lot smoother.
So do you still need a court order if they sign?
We still need a court order. So we have to have the affidavit from the biological mother. We have to file the adoption pleadings and her consent, present it to a judge in South Carolina, and we have to get that court order before we can even file that ICPC packet. And, a lot of waiting families don't understand that process and get really antsy. And, just like each state is different with ICPC, each county is different when it comes to getting a court order and what that process looks like. So, we have to send the pleadings and the court order to the clerk's office. They have to send it to a judge. It may be a holiday. The judge may be in trial. The judge's orders kind of stack up on their desk. Some counties will tell us which judge has the order and we can maybe call their secretary, but some counties won't tell us that. And also, families have to remember that we're doing this on almost a weekly basis.
Right.
And we can't really abuse those relationships because we need them often. And so everyone's case is important, and we're trying to push through everyone's case as quickly as possible while still respecting the court and the court rules to get that order.
So when you hear, as an adoptive parent, oh, you need to get a court order, like in our minds, that seems like, oh, that's just a little piece of paper. That'll take a day at most. But the reality is it could take weeks.
Right. So usually, it can take a week to a week and a half to get one of those court orders. It's just like you can't compare any part of one adoption story to another adoption story. Some families may get their court order in 2 days, but that's just because the stars aligned. That's what happened. We didn't do anything extra special for them. We followed the same process each time. And, we know that every family is antsy to get home.
Yep.
We get those calls. I know you get those calls. And, we drop everything when we have an out-of-state family waiting and get everything off of our plate and into the right hands as quickly as possible. But from there, it is a process.
Now, in a practical mindset, let's say it's me and my husband, and we are awaiting ICPC, but my husband doesn't get as much time off as I do. So what do we do about us both having to stay in the state? Like, what does the law say about that?
Right. So just the child has to stay here.
Okay.
So if your husband needs to go home, or if you need to go home, you can do that as long as the child stays here. Technically, neither parent has to stay here, just the child.
It's like a grandparent could stay.
Exactly.
Cool. I mean, the kid does need adult supervision. So.
At least till they're 18, right?
And so, really, we would like to really talk about practical things for the family, because that's what a lot of families are struggling with. The family can go anywhere in the state. They don't just have to stay in the county that the child was born in, correct?
Right. They can travel. A lot of people, I love Greenville. I live in Columbia, but a lot of people who haven't been to South Carolina have heard of Charleston.
Yes.
So a lot of families choose to get an Airbnb or rent a hotel room or stay with friends in Charleston. So, we recommend that the family, if it's South Carolina or wherever it is, research the state that they're going to, figure out a place where they feel like they can wait comfortably. Yeah. A lot of families do Airbnbs, and I think that can give you, kind of the creature comforts of home while you're waiting out the process.
Don't have to worry about the screaming infant in the hotel room, thinking about the people around you.
Right.
Yeah. So a lot of families are very antsy during that time, but really they can take the time to lean into each other and just bond with the baby and bond with your husband without having multiple family members coming in and out of the home to visit or coworkers stopping by. Mm-hmm. It can just be a really beautiful time to get to know this little baby.
Yeah, it's great for bonding. It's a perfect bonding time. And speaking from an adoptive mom who has had to wait out at ICPC a couple of weeks during a holiday, or actually it was during a natural disaster, a flood, and that shut down the government office and ended up being a little bit longer than we thought it would be. It's just, like Casey said, it's a really sweet time. We had just some time with our daughter and me and my husband in this quiet little town in North Carolina, and it was just really special. And I know that there's so much rush to allow the child to meet other family members and stuff, but it's just really awesome when you can kind of lock yourself into this space without constant visitors and germs and things like that. So
speaking of, you had to wait because you said it was a flood.
It was a flood,
That's
yes, in Columbia.
So there's always something. We have, families may be here over Thanksgiving or Christmas, or we had, I just finalized an adoption recently for a family that had waited through the hurricane that was here back in September. And, state offices shut down, and they said, people are having to evacuate and we can't even leave. And I was like, no, state offices are shut and we don't have an answer for you.
Yeah.
So, and we get calls and emails. It's always someone's birthday, someone's sick, someone needs to go back to school.
Yeah.
And we understand that and are sensitive to that, and we really try as hard as we can to get the families home as quickly as possible. But the families on the front end are always like, oh, we can wait forever, it'll be fine, we're just so happy to have this little baby. And then the second they're in that hotel room, they're like, when are we going home?
We always joke and say that the hardest part of the adoption process currently for our families is waiting to get off of that wait list onto the active list. But then they quickly realize that the hardest part is the actual wait, the wait of waiting to be chosen. That's the hardest part until they're chosen. Until they're chosen. Then once they're chosen, they're like, oh, thank God we're chosen. And then a few minutes later, they realize, oh, crap, now we have 4 months until the baby's born. This is the hardest part.
Yeah.
And then it's when the baby's born, and they have to wait on consents to be signed.
That's it.
That's the hardest part. But then they realize the really hard part is when they're waiting out ICPC. But then Elizabeth and I are over here saying, oh no, wait until your child's 7. That's the hardest part.
And it's funny, as much as I'm around adoption and I know what I'm not supposed to do as an adoptive family is bug the attorney. I'm guilty. I did the same thing when I was waiting ICPC. I feel like I texted Allie like 3 million times a day. So
did she, Allie? Can you admit?
It's hard to remember back that far. I'm sure she was the model client.
So what are some of the things that as an adoptive family we don't need to do?
Right. So I would say don't call the clerk's office. Don't call the judge's office. Don't call the ICPC office. You are paying us to be your lawyer, to navigate you through that process. Like I said, we do it almost weekly. And, the judges know us. We have developed relationships with the ICPC office. They are expecting us to be checking in, and it can really delay things or leave a bad taste in, especially a judge's mouth, if we are constantly bugging them. While this is the most important thing in your life, these judges are seeing case after case after case, day after day after day of everyone's most important thing. Mm-hmm. And so we have to be sensitive to that, and we have to be sensitive to the fact that there's going to be another family after you next week with the same needs. And so I would just say, you can call on us. We can let you know when each step of the process is completed, but just know that we and I'm sure other attorneys in this area that you're working with are trying as hard as we can to get you home too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I can imagine it can also just muddy the waters to the point to where if the clerk's office or whoever ICPC office does give an update to the family, then you as the attorney aren't in the know, and you might be waiting on something. It just too many hands in the pot.
Exactly.
Can get super confusing for everybody.
So, Allie, why is it important for a family to choose a Quad A attorney versus just a regular family court attorney?
Okay. Well, first of all, Quad A is the American Academy of Adoption-Assisted Reproductive Attorneys. So it's a national organization that adoption and surrogacy attorneys can apply to be a part of. We have to have completed a certain number of adoption or surrogacy cases to even be let into the organization. Plus, you have to have the support of people who know you in the community who can vouch for your work and for your ability. So I think, the reason why you should choose an adoption attorney who's familiar with and practices regularly in the adoption field is because most family law practitioners don't. Most family court attorneys who even say that they do adoption are really talking about relative or step-parent adoption. Most of them haven't dealt with start to finish of working with an expectant mother to completion of an adoption. Very few of them, have done an ICPC case. And so I think it's important to choose an attorney who's well-versed in adoption and, really focuses on that.
And the putative father registry. A lot of them haven't done that if they are not Quad A.
Right. I get questions from people asking me for my login to that, who are general family law practitioners because they don't have one. And then you never know what's going to come up in a case. So I know we had a case recently where ICWA came up, which is the Indian Child Welfare Act. And, that's kind of even a niche within a niche. I have to call on, people who are in Quad A who live in states who deal with the Indian Child Welfare Act more than we do here in South Carolina, to even know all the steps to complete there. So, and that can come up once you're already involved with a case. And so if you don't have someone who has access to those resources or who are familiar with that, then your case could take a wrong turn.
We always joke and say you wouldn't go to your cardiologist if you have
a brain tumor.
Yeah. So why would you go to a real estate attorney or a regular family law attorney that specializes in divorce law or grandparent adoptions whenever you're trying to adopt privately, domestically, infant,
Right. And this is the one thing, not the other things you want attorneys to mess up on. I feel like this is one super important thing that you want to make sure you're dealing with an attorney who knows the law front and back and sideways. So
You don't want to be somebody's guinea pig.
Exactly. Yes. So, Allie, what does it mean to be an ethical adoption attorney? I know in adoption world and in the community right now, there are so many conversations dealing with ethics, and we as an agency are striving to raise the bar in ethical adoption agencies. So, what does that look like from an attorney's perspective?
So, I think it can take on many different aspects, but one is just to say that the attorneys are a self-regulating industry. So, lawyers have to self-report themselves and each other. The court can self-report you when there's unethical behavior. We have to take an ethics, test to become a lawyer. And so there are some general guiding principles in a lawyer's oath that we have to follow anyway. But I would say in adoption, it's unique in the sense that as a lawyer, you're hired to zealously represent your client. So if I'm representing an adoptive family, my goal should be to get them the end goal of this adoption being finalized. But there are some unique personal aspects in an adoption that are different from other aspects of the legal field. So you have to work with expectant and birth parents. And so I think one of the things in working with an ethical adoption attorney is that you want someone who's going to have candor with the court. There have been a lot of things in the news recently about maybe attorneys who aren't necessarily candid with the court when it comes to the involvement of birth parents. If one example is sometimes we might get a letter in the mail from a biological father who's been served with an adoption proceeding. Well, according to the letter of the law, he should have filed that with the clerk of court.
Right.
And maybe he just sends it to our office as a letter. We don't shred that and stuff it in a drawer. We file it ourselves with the court and let the court know that there is a biological parent out there who is stating that they want to contest this adoption and that we need to proceed with that knowledge instead of trying to hide it away. So while zealous representation for your client may be ignoring that document, we're dealing with termination of parental rights, and we want to make sure that we are doing everything above board, and that if biological parents have stated that they want a voice in this process, that we are letting that voice be heard. A lot of times I tell clients, you want procedure to be there as well as substance. So, you may know that according to the law, we have the grounds to terminate this biological parent's rights, but we want to have the procedure in place perfectly. We need to provide notice when notice must be provided. We need to tell the court if they've filed a custody action and don't know about the adoption action, instead of just trying to sneak our adoption action through. And so you just want to be above board and making sure that everybody who needs notice or who has stated that they want a voice at the table is present at the table, so that when you get to a final adoption hearing, the right decision is made, the best interest of the child can be evaluated with all of the information being presented to the judge. And you don't want to get into a situation where your adoption is finalized and there's an appeal or hiccup after the fact. You want to make sure you've done everything correctly ahead of time.
Yeah. So, Allie, what are some things that hopeful adoptive families can be thinking about, or questions maybe they can be asking when they are looking for or considering an ethical adoption attorney?
Sure. So, first of all, from a bias perspective, I'd say go to the Quad A website and look and see who's in your area that you could pick their brain. And, of course, ask around to people that you know who may have used attorneys in that area. But I would ask them, you want to find out at the beginning how they're going to handle the situation. So if it's not an agency adoption, if it's an independent match, then one of the questions you are probably going to want to ask is, how is the law firm going to handle working with the expectant mother? Who is going to be having that contact? Lawyers, if an adoptive parent calls me and retains my services, then I'm representing the adoptive parent. And we have to make it clear to the expectant mother that we are not providing legal services to them, that a lawyer can be provided for them at the adoptive parent's expense. And, in our office, if it's an independent match, then we have social workers that we work with throughout the state who do not work for our law firm, who would be interfacing with that expectant mother and getting the information back to us to try to avoid a situation where we're providing legal advice or they have lack of clarity on who's representing who in the situation. So if it's an independent match, I would definitely ask that question. If it's an agency match, you're going to want to know what the laws in that state are on notice to all biological parents. You're going to want to ask them what questions they are going to be getting from the expectant mother or from the agency about the role of a potential father and what notice looks like to that person and what they would encourage you to do or not do in terms of interacting with the expectant mother and an expectant father. And then, you're always going to want to know what their fee structure looks like. In our office, we kind of split the fee up so that there's less risk to the adoptive parent if a potential match falls through, and that a lot of the financial risk is on the back end of the adoption after a consent is signed. So you're going to want to know what their fee structure looks like and have a detailed list of the estimated expenses that they're paying out to third parties. So you're not just getting an attorney fee, but you're knowing what the whole picture of the adoption is going to cost.
That's great. I think that's super helpful.
For sure. Well, Allie, thank you so much for being here today. Is there any type of resources that you recommend? I know you mentioned the Quad A website. What is that website?
It is adoptart.org. And so they have a lot of resources that they've put out themselves, and you can also find attorneys by state or by name by looking at that website. And it will tell you whether they do adoption or surrogacy or both.
And what is your website?
It is www.buildingfamiliessc.com.
And then your Instagram handle?
buildingfamiliessc.
Have you heard about the Promise Summit? If you are out there and you're listening right now and you are hoping to adopt, or you're an adoptive parent, or you're struggling with infertility, or maybe you feel called to adoption and you just have no clue where to start, then you need to be at the Promise Summit. Casey, tell us a little bit about what the Promise Summit is.
The Promise Summit is a Christian conference for couples considering adoption, in the wait of adoption, and or families who have adopted. This event is packed with powerful speakers, incredible worship, and a panel that represents all members of the adoption triad, and is sure to be a weekend that you will never forget. Our hope is that you leave the Promise Summit forever changed and armed with the promises from God that will encourage you throughout your entire adoption journey.
The Promise Summit will be held May 3rd and 4th in Greenville, South Carolina, and we would love to meet you there. You can find out more information at thepromisesummit.com or on Instagram at thepromisesummit.